What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns back with you post NFL Combine. Got a good episode for you today. It has been a while since I've been sitting in my home office doing this podcast with you, Jahns. I'm like a little out of sorts here to make sure everything works.
That seat is cold, very, very cold.
There's a lot of dust on my board here. And I'm like, I gotta wipe this thing down. So yeah, it's honestly been like over a month since I've sat here. We've been I feel like I was on the road for all of February because I pretty much was. But good to be back, and we got a lot of things to talk about post-combine. Eric Edholm from NFL.com is going to join us, one of their lead draft writers, and talk about takeaways from the combines, winners, losers, things like that. He's going to join us here in a little bit. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. At Hoge and Jahns is our show account. You can get all the merch at hogeandjahns.com. Of course, read all of Johnsy's coverage in The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge and Jahns. And I have a newsletter up for CHGO diehards at allchgo.com with my takeaways on pretty much everything I learned about Caleb Williams, Justin Fields while we were in Indianapolis. But we start this show with a little bit of news in reaction to what we expected and been expecting, honestly, for months, barring some type of change, which didn't happen. But Jalen Johnson did get the franchise tag. That's the road this thing is going down. And what's your reaction, Johnsy?
Expected. That's how I felt Tuesday when Ryan Poles met us. Even though he said he didn't want to use the franchise tag, you got the sense that he was ready to use it just in case negotiations didn't go the way he wanted, the way the Bears wanted with Jalen Johnson's representation. So here we are, not surprising, $19.8 million. That's a good contract for a cornerback, but of course you want some long-term stability for Jalen Johnson.
Yeah, and look, it sounded like they were maybe close at one point. I not exactly sure what happened, but I think that's why you heard Poles say what he had to say, sort of publicly negotiating last Tuesday in Indy, and nothing really changed from that point on. So, look, this is a tool to use in the negotiations. It's not all that surprising. And then we'll see what the next step is. I mean, typically what happens after the tag is nothing for a while.
Yeah, take a break.
Yeah, and then you move on to free agency. You work on the rest of your roster, which I guess is just sort of the downside for Jalen Johnson temporarily is funds get allocated elsewhere in the meantime. Not to say that they can't pay him, but it's just maybe a corner gets drafted. You know, who knows? It's just you're not locked in long term right now. You're locked in for 1 year, and it's his move to either sign the tag or not sign the tag in the meantime. And he can always hold out of the offseason program or even training camp if he wants to.
Do you think this changes the Bears' plans in any way for free agency? Here they are with an estimated $80 million in cap space. Here's $20 million now gone. I'm sure the Bears projected this in some shape or form, but do you think this changes how they attack next week in any way?
I don't, because that money was going to be allocated towards Jalen either way, whether it was the tag or a long-term deal. The numbers are relatively similar. If anything, the tag might be saving the Bears a little bit in the short term, depending on how they were going to structure that deal, I guess. But
I'm sure they'd like a lower cap hit. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, $19.8 million is a big cap hit, but it's not exactly, doesn't tie them up in any way in terms of their books.
Right, because you could have done more signing bonus up front and had that spread out. Maybe it doesn't hurt you as much this year. But look, the Bears aren't in cap trouble. I don't think this changes much there. The only thing it would possibly change is if there's anywhere in the back of their heads where they don't think Jalen Johnson's going to be a Bear come the fall. And that's not where my head's at. But I guess, he wouldn't be the first player to potentially hold out and end up getting traded in August before the season starts. I don't necessarily feel like that's the road this is going to go down. I think it'd be way more likely he plays on the tag for a year and revisit this in the future. I still feel relatively optimistic, though, that they're going to reach a deal at some point.
Is that before training camp begins, or do you see this? I see this going all the way up until training camp, to be honest, which is
I do too.
Which is fine. Like a lot of these franchise tag deals, I'd say that actually the majority of them don't result in long-term deals, at least in the past few years. Some of these players will just go play on the tag and hold out for another opportunity down the road. This is what happens. I think there's a stat out there from our friend Brad Spielberger. I'll have to look for it, but something about over the past few years, only 38% of franchise tags resulted in long-term deals, at least immediately within that year. So the odds aren't in that favor, so that's why I could see this going all the way to July, but you never know.
Well, and that's been the Bears' history with this too. Because we had a graphic on CHGO yesterday looking back at like the last 5 or 6 tags. So that would be Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey, Henry Melton, Matt Forte, and Lance Briggs. And the only one of those guys that got an extension before the franchise tag. Remember, there's a deadline in July where you have to come. You after that deadline in July, you can't negotiate anymore. You either have to play on the tag or not. Matt Forte was the only one who got a deal done before that. Now, Lance Briggs ended up getting re-signed, but that wasn't until the following offseason. So he did play on that tag. All the other ones, A-Rob, Alshon Jeffrey, none of those guys got a long-term deal done despite being tagged. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I do feel like it will come down to that July deadline. And then
I think it's July 14th. I could be wrong, but it's in that.
It's usually right there in the middle of July, right in the time period where we don't want to be thinking about football at all, right before training camp.
Here's the stat from Brad Spielberger, our friend at PFF. Brad, this is from Over the Cap. He got this from 2013 to 2023. 73 franchise tags were placed on players. 28 of those players agreed to extensions before the deadline. 38%.
Yeah. Well, it's too bad they couldn't work something out, but I'm not terribly surprised that we're here. I did want to do a quick kind of explainer on the different tags because I know there's some confusion about this. I know I got a lot of questions on social media about it. So here's a really quick explainer. So Jalen Johnson got the non-exclusive franchise tag. What that means is technically other teams are allowed to negotiate with Jalen Johnson. It's non-exclusive. So to the Bears. So other teams could negotiate, and theoretically he could agree to terms with a different team, and the Bears would have the right to match, or if they don't match, that team would have to give the Bears 2 first-round picks. So just think about that. No team's going to do that. No team's going to give up 2 first-round picks for Jalen Johnson. So there's not necessarily a risk of another team coming in and sort of messing with the negotiations or jacking up the price beyond what the Bears already value him at. And if somebody were to do that, Ryan Poles is probably going to be like, okay, I'll take those 2 first-round picks. That sounds pretty good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that's why the overwhelming majority of tags are this non-exclusive franchise tag. It's the norm. It's 100% the norm.
I would say if you're confused on this, the franchise tag as you know it and understand it is the non-exclusive tag.
Yeah, it's this one.
It's this one. Yes.
And every single tag handed out yesterday, except for one, the Kyle Duggar with the Patriots, he got the transition tag, which I'll talk about in a second. But all the other ones were the non-exclusive franchise tag.
Yeah, explain the transition tag because this is the different one. And, well, we know it here in Chicago because the Bears used it on Kyle Fuller.
So the difference with the transition tag is the number is lower. So you save a little bit by applying the transition tag, the 1-year number that goes with the tag. It's cheaper, but same deal. Allowed to negotiate with other teams. The difference being, if you agree to terms with a different team, that team does not have to give up anything. So in the case of Kyle Fuller, the Packers offered him a contract. They agreed to terms. The Bears had the right to match. But if they had let him go, they let him go. They get nothing back. So that you don't see it used as much because of that, but sometimes there are rare situations where it's like maybe you're unsure of what the actual outside market would be, and you just kind of reached a point where let somebody else do the negotiating for you.
Exactly.
You don't want to lose the player, but depending on what the contract looks like, you might be willing to just say, okay, goodbye. Now we're getting a little bit into the weeds. The one catch with that, as I understand it, is if you do let that player go, it does not help you in the comp pick formula. So, whereas if you just let a free agent go, it helps you in the comp pick formula. Now, that doesn't necessarily matter. The last one, which you don't see a lot, is the exclusive franchise tag. And that is just nobody else can negotiate with the player. And the only times you really see that would be like if Patrick Mahomes,
quarterback,
or Tom Brady in his prime. I shouldn't say only times you see that, but those are the types of players that you would do the exclusive, because you're just like, there's no price, there's no amount of draft picks that could come back in return that we would want to let this guy go. And we don't want another team meddling or setting the price way higher in our negotiations.
Because as we know, like, teams will part with first-round picks for quarterbacks.
Right. No. Now, we saw this last year with Lamar Jackson. The Ravens actually did the non-exclusive tag on Lamar Jackson. So a team could have come in and offered the world and been willing to give up 2 first-rounders for Lamar Jackson. And that's part of the conversation last offseason, if you remember it. Like, a lot of us were like, well, why doesn't a team just do that? But I think the reality is, remember, you're giving up 2 first-round picks and paying the player. That's a huge price. And the Ravens were probably going to match anything anyway. So that was kind of a unique situation. But it goes to show you, and even in that case, they did the non-exclusive franchise tag. They didn't even go exclusive. So long story short, completely normal, the tag Jalen got. I'll be shocked if anybody comes in and is willing to give him 2 first-round picks. So, and if they do, I would probably expect Ryan Poles to let him go and take the first-round picks. But that's probably not what's going to happen here.
And just a note on the transition tag. My understanding is why teams don't use it as often, even though they want to retain players, is that, well, teams structure contracts differently. They have different approaches. If you can remember the conversation about Kyle Fuller's tag, that was a very Packers-like contract. And, like, the Bears didn't structure contracts that way.
They were, the Packers backloaded that thing.
Yes, that's just how they do it. So the Bears weren't going to get rid of Kyle Fuller, but that's the risk of using the transition tag, is that teams will structure contracts differently than how you want to structure contracts.
Yeah. So, well, that's the latest on Jalen Johnson. Not necessarily surprised. Hopefully that all made sense to you. But we are going to move the conversation back towards the NFL draft now. And
only 50 days till it's here, Adam.
I know it's trust me, as I'm staring at this database I got to keep plugging into at any given moment of the day. I'm counting down. I'm starting to get worried here. Hopefully our friend Eric Edholm doesn't feel as rushed, but we'll find out right now as we bring in Eric Edholm from NFL.com. All right, we've known Eric Edholm for a long, long time now, and he is now the lead draft writer at NFL.com, which is awesome. And Eric, we saw you last week. You're scrambling around the convention center trying to get all the nuggets you possibly could, and we thank you for jumping on with us today to help share some of those nuggets with us.
Yeah, how frazzled did I look? Be honest. Like, because when I'm in Indy, like the clothes are disheveled, my hair's not perfect, nothing looks right, but I try to keep my head on straight for most of the week anyway.
If I'm a scout and grading you, there's some red flags definitely going up,
Fair.
I think it needs
definitely fair.
Rest, overcaffeinated,
Don't tell Bob McGinn, okay? Just as long as Bob's not sending his scouts out on me,
Yeah.
the secret scouting reports that come out right before the draft.
I think they're out now. I think they're already being teased at this moment.
It's the only reason I
really?
mentioned. I saw a batch was released this morning. It felt like an early Christmas / dark Christmas. I'm not sure.
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to check those out. Well, you can follow Eric on Twitter, and you should be at Eric_Edholm, and reading all his draft coverage at NFL.com. Let's just start with this. Most impressive players at the combine. Who stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot. I mean, depending on what position you're looking at, I thought day one, Braden Fisk, the Florida State D lineman, and I got a chance to see him down in Mobile as well. Rare Senior Bowl trade. He practiced with the American team all week and then switched to the National, or maybe it was the other way around. But, it came off a great Senior Bowl week, goes to the combine, kind of kicks things off for us on Thursday night with his, 40. And if you didn't hear it, he kind of, celebrated his 40, which is always fun for a big man. But, more than that, I mean, he just moved really well through the drills. The overall athletic profile was better than I thought it might be. A little short arms maybe, but I don't know. I just, the more I've sort of watched him and now the athletic numbers kind of back that up. He's a horse. I mean, he's a really good player up front. So he was one who stood out to me for sure. Obviously, Xavier Worthy, the record-breaking 40 time. He didn't work out in the positional drills afterward. I'm hoping he does so at his pro day. And, we've seen a good amount of him the last couple of years in college football, and we knew he was fast. But there's something about breaking that number that's gonna give you a pretty high floor as far as the draft is concerned. I mean, I would sort of be surprised at this point if he made it past like the Panthers pick at 33. If he's not a first rounder, then he's not lasting long in round 2. So he's got to be up there on that list. And there were several other receivers who look really good. And I know we'll kind of go position by position, but quarterbacks, it was hard to say whether there was one clear standout. I don't know that there was, but just by throwing, J.J. McCarthy kind of gave himself an opportunity to showcase his skills. And overall, I think had a very good day. And, you probably heard the same buzz that he's going a lot higher than I think a lot of people imagined, even a couple weeks ago.
Is it just me? I love to talk quarterbacks, but
yeah,
let's take a break for just a second.
Yeah, right.
All of these linemen, as big as they are, I mean, they were just flying. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman, like Joel Alt is 6'8" and change, right? Running the 40 in just over 5 seconds. Like that is amazing to me. But then there's like another guy, running in 5.01 seconds. Like, what do you think of all that?
It's pretty amazing. I mean, the caliber of athlete, especially at offensive tackle this year. I mean, there's some good edges, some good corners, some great receivers for sure. But I think relative to body size, when we gawk at the 4.22s for good reason, but I don't know if people fully appreciate how difficult it is for like you said, Joe Alt is 6'8" and 5/8. I mean, that's almost as tall an offensive lineman as I've seen enter the league. There's been a half a dozen or so who've been to the combine who've been taller. For him to run a 5 flat basically and have a good 10-yard split, which is sort of the key number for those the big guys, is incredible. I mean, this is a player that, if some people know his backstory, his dad was a Chiefs left tackle for 12, 13 years in the 80s and 90s. And his dad was a tight end. And then his dad basically said, look, if you want to keep your athleticism, don't play offensive line in high school. They're going to recruit you as an O-lineman, but keep your athleticism, and then you can add the weight. And this guy was starting midway through his freshman year. And, a couple little bumps in the road, but boy, for the last 2 years, he's been unbelievable. And to maintain that athleticism while building up your core strength and body size and everything. And yeah, I mean, between him and Amarius Mims, Tyler Guyton, we didn't really see J.C. Latham work out, but he's another big dude who can, move a little bit, and the strength, boy, I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, this tackle class is really impressive.
Did anyone stand out to you with the running backs? Because it's an interesting class, and that it seems like the more and more I was watching the combine coverage, it seems like there's a lot of them that could be contributors relatively early and help a lot of teams, but they just seem like so bunched that it's just like, pick your favorite flavor.
Yep, I think you set it up perfectly. I think there was last year with Bijan and Gibbs in round one and some other guys kind of just after that. It felt like a big running back class this year. I think up until about a month ago, people were saying it's not a great running back class. But I'm like you, the more I kind of step back and look at it, there's sort of a flavor for everybody. You want the tough interior runner, kind of in the Roshan mold a little bit. Audric Estime is going to be your guy. If you want speed, we just saw Jalen Wright run a really, really good 40 time at 220 pounds, I want to say, and doesn't have a lot of mileage on him at Tennessee. Didn't have an abundance of carries, so he's got tread on his tires. Trey Benson was an electric college football player who performed well this weekend. Marshawn Lloyd, I'm a little surprised the USC back hasn't gotten a little more attention. So I'm trying to think, it wasn't a great workout for Bucky Irving, but I think his tape is good. And I think he's a good football player who may not be special, but the South Dakota State kid, Isaiah Davis, opened my eyes at the Senior Bowl and then again at the Combine. Isaac Garendo barely used at Louisville and Wisconsin, and now he's running blazing 40. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think there's some talent here. It may not be that super rare, unicorn, high-end, one-of-one type talent, but some pretty functional, useful backs in this group.
If you're the Bears and you're looking at wide receivers,
yep.
How loaded is it really? Because I feel like, I don't know, you're looking at maybe 15, 16 guys that could go in the top 50. How would you, take me through some names beyond the top three, but how loaded is this class at receiver?
Yeah, we'll just brush past the Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors group. They're at the top. They're going in the first, whatever single digit number of picks. I don't know whether, one of them will be there at 9 or not. But the talk out of Indy that I kind of heard from a personnel director, an assistant GM, even an area scout who in the Southeast said, don't forget about Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas, even with some drops, some inconsistency in his game, is an explosive player who, athletically and measurements wise, looks like a top 10 pick. Now, maybe the body work isn't quite complete enough, but he told me he's going top 15 or so. It wouldn't shock me at all. So really, it could be a top 4. And then the question is, how does it lay out after that? We mentioned Worthy, his teammate A.D. Mitchell at Texas, another bigger player, maybe a little more well-rounded receiver, big play guy. You have the Malachi Corley, Debo Samuel light kind of guy. There's Ladd McConkey from Georgia, who had he not missed a few games, I think would have come in with a little more hype. People saw what kind of a natural receiver he was. His gauntlet drill was just beautiful. I mean,
it's the straightest line I've ever seen anybody run that.
It was just fluid. Yeah, I loved it. Roman Wilson. There were a couple guys who maybe underwhelmed a little. Troy Franklin from Oregon, kind of was a little disappointed with him. I know he ran fast, but it's at 170 something pounds. Keon Coleman, I almost said Brandon Coleman, from Florida State would be on my disappointing list. Although his field work was better than his timing, but still, I just rattled off 12 names without even sweating, and that's, man, other than last year, I feel like, 8 or 9 of the past 10 drafts, we've said, man, is this receiver class something else? But this one really is.
So here's my follow-up to that, though, because with the depth in mind, there's the conversation about positional value, and I think we're all assuming that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze go, and Malik Neighbors potentially too. I think there's some questions about him off the field that still need to be answered at least a little bit.
Yep.
But I think we're all assuming that these guys go, potentially even 4, 5, 6. Some people have said. But if there's so much depth later on, I just wonder, is it smarter to go grab Joe Alt or grab one of these other positions where there's not as many of those guys, because you can still grab a pretty damn good receiver in the second round.
Yep. Oh, that's always the debate, and it's an interesting one. I can see it from both sides, right? We've had it in different positions over the years, whatever, but it's a good one to have at receiver this year, where you say, is getting Roman Wilson in round 2, let's say, can you live with that? Like, is he 85% of Malik Neighbors? And is that a better trade-off than getting another position where like the first guy is really good, but the fourth or fifth guy, he's only 70% of the player, if that makes sense. I'm not explaining it well, but yeah, I mean, that's the question, and that's where you have to really, if you want to use like a fantasy football term, like tiers, right? You have to see where the drops are in these things, and of course, if you're the Bears and you don't have currently a second round pick, you say, how are we going to get one so that we can get into that position where we have that choice? We can either take Alt or Fuaga or one of these other great offensive tackles and feel good enough about Wilson or Jermaine Burton or whoever else in round 2. So it does drop off after a certain point. It always does, obviously. I think it drops off a little earlier than some people say it will. Just my opinion. I don't know that there are going to be a ton of day 3 receivers who are great. Maybe even late day 2, it starts to thin out a little, but it's definitely a discussion you have to have.
I feel like we're not talking about like defensive players enough. Right? Like there's offensive tackles, receivers, not just this conversation, but just like generally. And I get it's because you have these teams that need quarterbacks high in the draft. And you have these 3 great quarterbacks, maybe 4 quarterbacks, if you bring J.J. McCarthy in it. But who are you looking at defensively? Like, who should the Bears consider at number 9? Like, how would you grade out the top 3 or 4 defensive players?
And that's the crazy thing. They could get the first defensive player off the board at number 9. I mean, that is not a wild possibility. We don't know Atlanta's plans at 8, but I've been hearing quarterback for them. Obviously, Tennessee at 7, new regime there. They could go in a million different directions, but there's a decent chance that we could go 10 plus picks without a defensive player taken. I don't think we've ever had that. I remember there was a draft recently where it was 7 out of 10 in the first 10 picks were offensive players. And we said, wow, what a slant towards the offense. But this year is going to be different than we've ever seen. So, that you could have Quinyon Mitchell, the Toledo corner, be the first defender off the board. Maybe it's Dallas Turner. He had a great workout in Indy. Any questions are probably about size or specific scheme fit, but he's pretty darn good. So those are the 2 that I've heard a lot about. I don't personally view Chop Robinson as a good player. Don't get me wrong, but to me, he's this year's Nolan Smith. And there was a ton of Nolan Smith buzz last year. I kept wanting to see it. Like, his effort was unbelievable, but I kept thinking, I'm like, I must be missing something with him. And the athletic traits are so exciting, but I didn't see a player that was going to step in and be a 10-sack guy or an immediate contributor. And he wasn't, granted on a pretty good defense, but yeah, I kind of view Chop the same way. I think right now he's going to be a 3rd rusher, and those athletic traits will help him, but I'm not quite as enamored. And from there, it's like everybody has a little flaw. Terrion Arnold, redshirt sophomore, had a tough game against Texas, a little bit up and down. I didn't think he was outstanding in the Rose Bowl. Laiatu Latu from UCLA was medically retired at one point, has short arms. There's some negatives there. So, if you start looking through like the top 10 defensive prospects, they all have, I don't want to say a fatal flaw, but a noticeable one where you say, I can't really endorse them in the top 10 or 12 picks. And so that's just kind of the draft it is. I think there's decent depth at corner. Safety's okay, not bad, not terrible, not as bad as I thought. But there's no really truly exciting linebacker. Byron Murphy, the Texas D tackle, I forgot about him.
Yeah. 3 technique option maybe.
Yeah, I think he's really good. The more I watched him, I kept saying, well, he's a little short and he's sort of length, restricted a little bit, but his quickness and his nose for the ball is really good. His effort, I mean, it's all there. They had him running in touchdowns and catching touchdowns too. He's he's got a little like Christian Wilkins to him, I guess maybe. But yeah, I'm a fan.
Well, shout out to Texas because they just seem to have guys everywhere at the combine, like
Loaded.
at every position. Just I guess except for quarterback. I can't resist. I'm sorry, you know me. We got to talk some quarterback here at least.
Yeah.
Here's my bold prediction. Actually, I ran into Alec Lewis, who covers the Vikings, of course, for the Athletic, right at the end, right as I was leaving the combine, and I left him with this. I said, "Here's my bold prediction: JJ McCarthy ends up on the Vikings."
Yep. And what was Alec's response?
He was like, "Oh, okay." And now that was before. Yeah, I don't think he agreed with me, but that was honestly before. Now all this the winds are blowing here. Last few days that Kirk Cousins might be headed to Atlanta, and we'll see how that all plays out. I'm trying to figure out, Eric, where JJ is going to end up. I don't know that he fully took advantage of his opportunity at the combine to kind of stand out. I will say this because I was actually up last night watching the rest of the quarterback workouts that I had missed on Saturday just from the television copy, obviously, but I don't know. Like McCarthy and Penix were the only two that really. I'm just gonna say it, some of those quarterbacks are not good. Like they were just struggling to even complete passes at times. So I like McCarthy. I'm just trying to figure out how much the NFL is really gonna like him.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of came into Senior Bowl week and viewed him as like the draft wild card at that position and. I thought his best hope was to compete for quarterback 4 honors and, somewhere down the line after Williams, Maye, Daniels, whatever order you want to put those guys in, McCarthy was battling for number 4. I'm not sure he is. I know it sounds crazy, but like just based on some of and these are people who have no reason to lie to me. Like I always think about that too. Like, am I talking to a person who is trying to sort of lead me down the wrong path here? And they're all, like I talked to one team that drafted a quarterback last year and has a starter in the prime, in the prime of his career. And he's like, look, man, I think he's going to end up being QB3 when it's all said and done. QB. Okay. Wait a minute now. Apparently people aren't as enamored with Drake Maye as I thought they might be. There's a little bit of suspicion there. I mean, there was suspicion about Justin Herbert in the same respect too. And I mean, I know he went 6th, but there were some people who wondered whether he should have gone 6th. So I'm with you. I think there aren't very many quarterbacks after a certain point that are redeemable, as far as using a draft pick on. But that only helps, I think, McCarthy go higher in a certain respect. So whether it's Atlanta, if they don't go the Cousins route, the Giants at 6. I mean, could you not picture JJ McCarthy as a Giant? Just forget the Daniel Jones situation for right now. He just sort of looks like what the Maras would dream up in a quarterback. And I don't know that it would last too long after that with, the Broncos are desperate to get somebody. The Raiders may be a little more patient. I don't know if they're involved in Fields or not. We'll see. But how
about this hypothetical? How about this hypothetical, Jahns? Bears are on the clock at 9. Vikings are trying to call up.
Oh,
do you let them have McCarthy?
You hold them like hostage on that phone for as long as possible to get as much as you want. Like, all right,
the Vikings have been wheeling and dealing on draft night with the Lions now.
They have.
We've seen some NFC North trades here.
But you ask for everything. And this is your division rival. And like, even if you're the Bears and you have in your evaluation McCarthy's good, right? Like, well, okay, give us, your first rounder in 2026, just for good measure. So they can't like get a receiver for him down the road. Make it hard for him to build around the quarterback.
I agree. Especially if it's a team you're going to be playing twice a year forever. I mean, yeah, why not? I mean, if they don't want to make a deal, then somebody else will. I mean, he's going high. I'd be shocked if he didn't at this point, just based on what I've heard. I wasn't expecting that coming into, February, March.
All right, you can't. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
I was going to say, you can't get out of here about not talking about Caleb Williams. Can we just leave it at that? Tell us what you know, what you heard, what you thought as you watched him at the media session. Give us everything you got from the combine and Caleb Williams.
Yeah, let's dump it all out there. First of all, I don't have to tell anybody, like, he's really, really gifted. Just a natural thrower and player, and obviously the 2022 tape was a little bit more exciting and a little bit more upside and thrilling and everything else. I mean, it felt like it was a generational type quarterback watching him in 2022, and there was just a little less than that last season because of some of the defensive issues they had. I mean, he had to play a certain way to keep him in games. He had to take more risks, and he talked about that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like the play style, it's not going to be perfect. There are shades of Aaron Rodgers. There are shades of Kyler Murray. There are shades of Patrick Mahomes. But he's his own guy. He's going to have to live with his mistakes along the way because he's one of the few guys who can atone for him. I mean, he could make enough plays to where you forgot that second quarter interception where he threw across his body, and that's just what he's going to have to be. So the team that gets him, I think, has to be a little bit more tight defensively and have something to kind of back him up, like Mahomes had last year with the Chiefs defense, right? I mean, I know that doesn't get talked about very often, but Pat didn't have his best year until the playoffs. And that's, I think, a little bit of the style of play you're going to see from him. Now, as far as the personality goes, maybe he's got a little Aaron Rodgers to him too, in the sense that he's a highly confident, intelligent kid, independent thinker, may not do things exactly the way a team wants. Kyler Murray was sort of that way too. I think he was Caleb's a little more extroverted in my opinion, and maybe a little bit more of a outward personality face leader for a franchise. But there've obviously been people who've questioned him on that regard. And, look, it's like, if I want to use an NBA analogy, Kyrie Irving was clearly the best player in his class when he came out, whatever year that was, 2010, 11, whatever. He led the Cavs to a championship, and he also was difficult along the way. He went to the Celtics, led him to, success, and was difficult. I mean, I don't know if that's him or not, but I kind of got some of those vibes from him a little bit. We'll see. Sometimes a combine session and everything else I've watched of him can be misleading. I'll be fascinated to see how he meshes with a head coach, with a team, with a maybe a veteran locker room that's already been established. So I don't know. It's a little bit curious.
Look, one of my favorite things about this discussion is, and look, there's no question his 2022 tape overall is probably better than his 2023 tape overall, but it's not like it was bad.
It wasn't bad. No.
This guy still threw for 30 touchdowns and 5 interceptions last year.
I know.
He like I've heard some people just casually throw that out there, like, well, he didn't have a great year last year. I'm like, guess what? His completion percentage was higher. He actually averaged more per completion than he did the year before. He threw the ball like 112 times fewer last year than he did the year before. A lot of it's just like they weren't on the field as much because the defense was terrible. So it's kind of comical. He set the bar so high in 2022 that there was almost no situation in which he could have lived up to it. And I just feel like that Notre Dame game, and Jahns, you were at that game. I just feel like too many people are focused on one game that just didn't go that well in that. And by the way, there's like a handful of amazing throws in that game too.
Yeah, I mean, go watch Patrick Mahomes against K-State and ask if you saw a future 3-time Super Bowl champion on that tape. You know what I mean? It's like ice skating. You throw out the highest score and the lowest score. I mean, I really feel like you have to do that on some level. And I mean, you're right. I think the biggest thing for me is the ball security with the fumbles and the sacks taken. And there are times when he passes up scrambling opportunities where it's like, man, you could have had 6-7 yards right there. Instead of now it's 2nd and 10, or 3rd and 10, it could have been 3rd and 4, right? Now those kind of situations he learns that instinct a little bit better, I think he's going to be fine. And that offense, I don't think really did him any favors. Like, can you give me a check down once in a while? Like, he didn't even have that option in a lot of his passes. So 5-man protections, ask him to kind of create and buy time and do all this stuff and put up the numbers you said. It's pretty darn good, man. Like, we've almost become spoiled or numb to the fact these guys are making ridiculous plays more often than not.
Would you be surprised if he doesn't go first to the Bears?
Yeah, I would at this point. I went into the week with an open mind. Maybe Poles is doing this creative trade down thing and he's actually secretly like somebody else, but I extinguished that fairly quickly. I mean, again, you never know. Something could come up, but assuming Caleb like nuke it and say, pull an Eli Manning and just say, nope, not happening, then I don't see how he passes him up.
Yeah, and I don't think it's headed down that road right now. At least it
doesn't
really seem like it. Eric, outstanding insight as always. We love your draft coverage. Everybody should be following him at Eric_Edholm on Twitter. Go check it all out, NFL.com. Appreciate all the work you put in, especially this time of year, Eric. Thanks for jumping on.
My pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, it's good being on with you guys.
Thanks, man.
So, Jahns, what the podcast we recorded last week, we didn't get really a chance to react to Caleb's press conference on Friday. I was impressed. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. It's the biggest circus I can remember. Some people have brought up Manti Te'o, the Manti Te'o year.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I mean,
you
there
can
was
actually see me on the documentary, like to the
That's
side
right.
of Manti Te'o.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot of people there. That crazy first question that in the moment I didn't even realize had been asked. But going back and understanding what that question actually was and how aggressively like attacking it was, I thought it was impressive how Caleb just like shrugged it off and answered it. I don't know. I thought he came off as affable and had good answers to everything that was thrown his way. He had to deal with, I don't know, was it 5 or 6 questions from Greg Braggs Jr.? That didn't faze him.
That alone in itself is, that's something. That's
an accomplishment.
Yeah. I'm trying to trust my first impressions and instincts more in situations like this. Like in terms of like, there had to be hundreds of media there just for him in a crowded, what's that? Like convention hall, right? Like just for him and just how he handles that. He was comfortable. He was confident. I didn't get a sense of any. Some people describe them as arrogant. I didn't get any of that. I sense more confidence from him, and really to Eric's point, if there's some Aaron Rodgers in him in that capacity, I'm willing to tell you that's a good thing. Like it's about time the Bears maybe had a quarterback who had that.
Bears need that.
Oh man, right.
I mean. It goes back to what I've been saying on this podcast for years. Aaron Rodgers, pain in the ass, but he was good. Jay Cutler was pain in the ass too. But if Jay Cutler played better and was more consistent, Bears probably have a Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like it's you could live with it. So this is professional sports, man. It goes back to, I don't necessarily agree with what Eric was saying, like the comparison to Kyrie Irving, but his point is well taken. Kyrie Irving's a pain in the ass, but at least early on in his career, he was winning a lot. Now I think it's gone a little off the rails, and I don't think that's. I don't get the sense, you guys know at this point, people I've talked to that have coached and dealt with or played with Caleb Williams, I don't get that sense that he's Kyrie Irving. But the point there is, like, you need some edgy players at some point. You just need the right balance. You just don't want to go overboard with it like Phil Emery did, where you had way too many conflicts going on there. But I think it's going to be fine.
If anything, I got the sense that he could handle us, that he could handle Chicago. Yeah, there'll be some things that happen. Surely it happens with every single quarterback that I've ever covered with the Chicago Bears, even the nice ones like Josh McCown, like the overly nice ones.
Yeah,
like Josh McCown, like stuff happens. It's the Chicago media. There's no market like it, and a lot of things happen during a football season.
Well, and to that point, as whatever reputation we might have here in Chicago for being tough as a media group and fan base, and all, like we've been doing this for it's my 14th season. I think it's your 13th. I've never heard anyone ask a question like that first question. Like, say what you want about Chicago media. Like, hey, you're not going to hear anyone ask an aggressive question like that. That's just like, I mean, most of the questions are very, very, with some rare exceptions, very respectful, even if they're tough. So I thought that was a big box to check. That was a legitimate question. I mean, Josh Lucas has been on this podcast talking about that. How does, Justin Fields can handle this market. Do you know that about Caleb Williams? But so far, I think he's passing that test.
Absolutely. 2 thumbs up. I agree with you.
I think the Bears think that too, by the way. So it's important. All right. Fun episode today. Appreciate everybody listening. Thanks to Eric Edholm for jumping on. Again, please go check out HogeandJahns.com for all our merch. Jahns has got the hoodie on right now. Now is a great time, too, to get those golf polos available. It is golf season. Let's hope it stays that way. This is the year where we're going to get 3 snowfalls in April. We're going to pay for this now. We're,
the ice storm on opening day for like little league season here.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be, we're going to have 10 rainouts in April for baseball, for sure. But anyway, get those golf polos. It's all up at HogeandJahns.com. Follow us on Twitter at HogeandJahns and us individually at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. Please rate and review the podcast. Hit subscribe on YouTube. Help us grow that YouTube channel. We appreciate you very much. You can always watch this podcast on YouTube. If you want to consume it that way, it's available to you. And we know that a lot of you do. So thank you very much. We will be back later in the week with another episode. Is our guest confirmed?
I think so. Yes.
I think so. Yeah, Diana Rossini is going to jump on. And I think that episode's going to drop on Friday. So, it's Wednesday today. I'm already losing track of my days. It is Wednesday today. We're going to talk to Diana Rossini on Friday. She had a lot of insight, including on the Bears that came out of that combine. So we're going to talk about all that with her on Friday. So we will talk to you then.
See ya.